to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, April 15th, 2016. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Kaahumanu Friday going into the weekend here. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Brad is in the control room answering phones. We've already got a caller waiting. I'm going to get to you in just a minute. Couple of program notes. Next Tuesday, in hour number 3 of our program, we're going to have Daniel McGowan and Eileen Flemings. These are two of the people who are behind this program of billboards trying to remind America of the surviving veterans of the USS Liberty and how they've been basically ignored and sidelined by their own government after Israel attacked that ship. And the billboards keep coming under attack by Israel's supporters saying it's anti-Semitic and Jew hate to remind people that Israel killed 34 U.S. sailors and wounded 171 others. And, nobody cares about sailors. The only reason they're complaining about the Liberty is just because they want to say bad things about Israel. And one of the companies, Outfront Media, broke their contract with the group, pulled the billboard down 2 weeks early. And I think what we ought to do is boycott all the products that are on those Outfront billboards and call all the clients on those billboards, whoever they are, and tell them, I am not buying your products because you're advertising on Outfront billboards, and they are moral cowards who refuse to stand by Americans. So, today's the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. Actually, the FBI just announced that the Titanic was actually very, very depressed and committed suicide. And it's also tragically the anniversary of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and the assassination of the Boston bombing false flag. And you already heard a nod to that in the news break where they're going to be welding closed all those blue mailboxes, as if anybody actually uses those anymore in this age of email and instant text messages. As you heard, there's been another major quake over in Kumamoto-shi, Japan. This is the area that got hit with 2 magnitude 6 and a bunch of smaller aftershocks yesterday, and today they had a 7.1. And if you look at the area on Google Earth, Japan has a very strong earthquake code, but this is all residential area, and I'm sure they're just having a heck of a time with it over there. No tsunami warnings for here in Hawaii. No tsunami warnings for the west coast of the United States. Let's grab a phone call here from Richard in Mississippi. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Our elections, Mike, our elections are so crooked it's going to affect the ability of the American people to trust all future elections for a long time.
Oh, absolutely, and they shouldn't trust the elections. This idea of the government coming down and saying, trust us, we're doing everything, that's nonsense. They're the government. Of course they're going to cheat. And it's not only destroying the credibility of the elections for the American people for decades to come, but it's destroyed the credibility of the United States as some kind of champion of democracy around the world when we don't even have democracy here.
And there's also the eligibility of Ted Cruz citizenship. That's not going to go away.
No, it isn't.
And Donald Trump, like Hillary and our lawyers, Donald Trump's lawyers can easily sue Ted Cruz for his eligibility.
Well, I don't know why Trump isn't moving on that now. I think Trump maybe is waiting to see just who it is they're going to throw up against him at the GOP convention, because Cruz has got too many liabilities and he's sinking in the polls already. So yeah. Trump may be playing it very, very cool, or he may wait, let the GOP nominate Cruz, and then he'll take Cruz out and say, okay, I'm the candidate to replace him. But, the reaction in the independent media and the blogosphere is that this judge was either bribed or simply incompetent to have gone along and said that Ted Cruz, born in Canada, of 2 parents who were Canadian citizens at the time, and as it develops may not have actually been married at the time, is not a natural-born U.S. citizen. Because if, in point of fact, Ted Cruz's mother's divorce from her previous spouse had not been finalized when Ted Cruz was born, then he is technically born out of wedlock. And under U.S. law, children born to U.S. citizens out of the country, out of wedlock, do not qualify for birthright citizenship.
Ted is born in Canada. Even though I have nothing against Canadians.
No, I love Canadians here. I'm just a strict constitutionalist, and you're either in compliance with the Constitution or you are an illegal, illegitimate government. And this judge ought to be debarred or whatever it is they use to get judges kicked off the bench, because either he got bribed, offered a Supreme Court judgeship or something, or he's simply incompetent. But he should not be sitting up on that bench.
Or he may be threatened. That's a possibility.
Maybe, well, if he was threatened, he could recuse himself. But I don't care which one it is. If you're not willing to do the job you're supposed to be doing, step down. Find some other meaningful employment.
But I knew one thing for sure. That eligibility requirement is not going to go away.
No, it isn't going to go away. And it doesn't. You need to understand something very important. The government likes to pretend that it's up to the courts to interpret the Constitution. And in point of fact, it isn't. If you read the Constitution, the Supreme Court is not allocated exclusive jurisdiction to interpret the Constitution. The interpretation of the Constitution is up to the people who own the Constitution, those first 3 words up at the very top, we the people. So if we decide that Ted Cruz is not a natural-born citizen, we can act by simply refusing to vote for him.
Yep.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Get back into the news here. Let's see. Latest Fox News poll. Trump at 45%, Cruz at 27%, Kasich at 25%. Cruz is just 2 points ahead of Kasich. That's not a very strong showing. And again, the latest development in this whole saga about Ted Cruz. Now, Ted Cruz is refusing to release documents that would establish firmly that he qualifies as a U.S. citizen. He's released his birth certificate, but that's Canadian. And what he is refusing to release is his mother's marriage license and the final decree on her divorce from her previous spouse. Because if she had not yet married Cruz's father, and Canadian authorities will neither confirm nor deny that they were already married when Cruz was born. Again, under Section 309C of the Immigration Natural Act, Ted does not receive birthright citizenship if he's born out of wedlock. Now, I would agree that that's not exactly fair because it's not Ted's fault whether he's born in or out of wedlock, but that is the letter of the law. And if Ted Cruz's mother had not received her final divorce decree, or Ted Cruz's father, because he was divorcing his previous, then their Canadian marriage is illegitimate. They're guilty of bigamy. And this does need to be cleared up. But the reality of the matter is, Judge Mason cannot arbitrarily say, I think natural born means born outside the country. He's not allowed to do that. Natural born means born inside the country. That was the legal definition that was used by the creators of the Constitution. Chief Justice John Jay indicated the reason for that to be applied to the presidency was so that the America's military might not come under control of somebody born and raised in another country. Now, the natural born requirement is not applied to senators and representatives. Therefore, it means something special. It's not just flowery rhetoric. All right, Bernie Sanders is out on the campaign trail. He's calling for a national fracking ban. It's not going to win him any friends in the shale oil companies, but he's saying it's time to look at all the consequences of this methane pollution that's pouring on out. So Sanders is paying attention to the real reason all these fish are dying in the ponds and lakes and streams and rivers. And the official story is always, the water was oxygen depleted. But they don't mention that methane bubbling up from fracking takes the oxygen out of water. We've explained the chemistry before. We don't need to do it again. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And other information coming out of the recently released Fox News poll. The Democratic race is tightening. And that's hardly a surprise. Bernie Sanders has won 8 of the last 9 primaries, and it's only through Democratic Party chicanery that Hillary keeps getting more delegates than he does. And everybody knows that's what's going on. Another aspect of the Fox News poll, 30% of Bernie Sanders supporters say that if Hillary gets the nomination, they will not support her. They will vote the Republican candidate. Her support is crumbling as word about all of her crimes and corruptions gets on out. And there's a doozy that has just hit the grate. We're going to be talking about that one here in a little tiny bit. Let's grab ourselves a phone call. Matt in Colorado, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Mike. I was watching the Democratic debate last night, and there were three issues that really stood out to me that were absolutely absurd, and I'm preaching to the choir here. One of the first ones was that when Wolf Blitzer demanded twice that Bernie Sanders owe the victims of Sandy Hook an apology, I thought that was completely absurd because he had nothing to do with it. It would be like saying, do I owe an apology to somebody when I have nothing to do with it?
Well, Hillary's argument is because Bernie Sanders refused to support her bill to allow the victims of gun makers to sue gun manufacturers, which is a stupid concept.
I understand it.
Yeah.
Listen to it and understand it. And Sanders responded appropriately. And what really disturbed me, and I know you're obviously on the independent media, the CNN debates, of course, and Wolf Blitzer specifically said, I almost jumped out of my chair because he said, do you owe the victims of Sandy Hook an apology for supporting the Second Amendment? It was such ridiculousness. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I'll tell you, if I'd been there on the other side, I would have come back and they said, I'll apologize to the victims of Sandy Hook if Hillary Clinton apologizes to the victims of Benghazi. Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
according to Hillary Clinton, we didn't lose anybody in Libya.
Yeah, well, forget 4 people in Libya. Former Secretary
of State. At this point, what's the difference?
I mean, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright said that she would make the same decision again to have 500,000 deaths of civilians in Iraq for an illegal war. And if you're looking at Hillary Clinton's existing position, she's the Secretary of State. And then the other thing that, I wanted to give Bernie Sanders a lot of props for was that he said, we have to support the Palestinians. And that's absolutely true because there's genocide going on there. And the one thing that everyone was talking about, Israel this, Israel that, no one ever said Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. foreign policy money, approximately $3 billion a year.
Oh, it's more than that.
And that money could be... Okay.
And Israel's demanding even more than they're getting now. I mean, you have to pay us for failing to, block the P5+1 deal. Israel is writing us a traffic ticket for making friends with Iran. That'll be $6.5 billion, please.
Yeah, and then with that, this is one of the things that I wanted to throw out to your listeners so that maybe some of them can do some more research because I don't really have the time to do it. But there were multiple times during the debate where Hillary Clinton said, I worked with my husband on this. My husband. And I wanted to count the number of times she said my husband because when I'm almost 36 years old. When I was a kid, I was hanging out with my father and my sister. We watched a televised national break-in from, NBC or whatever it was. Bill Clinton comes on and he says, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And I'm like, Dad, what does this have to do with foreign policy and the United States? Why is this man who is the leader of the free world talking about his sex life on TV? Then, Hillary keeps referring to him in a public debate for the next presidential candidacy as my husband and I, my husband and she said it
let me cut in here because we're running out of time here. Hillary's trying to wear the skin of the leopard, but the reality is there is no real office of the First Lady of the United States of America. It's an honorary title. There's nothing in the Constitution about the boss's wife having any authority or power whatsoever. Now, I have no doubt she was part of the machinations behind the scene, but she's trying to act like Bill Clinton's presidency should count as her prior experience in the White House, and that's complete and utter nonsense. That's like Neil Armstrong's wife saying that she's now qualified to fly the space shuttle, if we actually still had a space shuttle.
We agree. And I want to say one more thing that
quick.
Might have been lost. Yeah, it might have been lost to the audience, but Wolf Blitzer mentioned something about Chelsea Clinton in a question early on in the interview, as if that was some type of a validation or that she had any relevancy in a conversation whatsoever as a non-elected official. And this whole thing just seems like an aristocracy being rebuilt, and of course that's what it is.
Of course, yeah. We have two ruling dynastic families, the Bushes and the Clintons, and they really thought they were going to go into November with a Bush-Clinton campaign, which meant it didn't really matter who got elected. They would still jointly be in power. Now Jeb Bush is out, Hillary's in trouble, and the American nation could break free from this, dual dynastic dictatorship that we've been in for all these years. Okay?
Yeah, and of course, maybe you've heard this before, and I'm sure you mentioned it, but in one of the last Trump speeches, he mentioned Bernie Sanders and said, hey, we're both outsiders and we're getting thrown under the bus by the dual-party system. And I thought that was good on Trump's part, although I don't agree with a lot of stuff he says, but at least he acknowledged that they're, trying to undercut the legitimacy of these parties or these individual candidates.
Yeah, but you notice it's not working. I mean, Bush is already out and Clinton is in serious trouble. We're going to see what's going to happen up in New York. There's going to be a lot of chicanery. Matt, I need to let you go. We've got another caller here. Michael in New Jersey. I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. The Republican Party is a private organization. Now, I know, people are complaining that the Republicans are doing this and that. Well, it's a private club. I'm an executive member of the Republican Party. So, yes, it is true that we can do what we want because it's a private club. People have to separate the fact that the Republican Party is not part of the government, even though they have the perception that it is. It is not.
No, it's not. It's not part of the government. They just made up their own little club to hijack the will of Republican voters.
Yes, and I recommend the people out there who are pissed off to actually start getting involved and taking those seats. It starts with the county committee level. You run for county committee, you get to pick the candidates in your local election.
No, you don't. That's all getting hijacked as well. We've got two articles on WhatReallyHappened.com about lawsuits over fraud in those low-level elections. The voter fraud is not just for president. It's now for Congress, mayors, governors. We've had, huge problems with election fraud with our governors out here in Hawaii. This goes all the way down to the bottom. It's a systemic problem, and unfortunately, until you get rid of those party machines, it's going to continue. Okay, I got to let you go, Michael. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, the New York Post has come on out endorsing Donald Trump for president. And they have a pretty solid readership going into the New York primary next Tuesday. Now, let's get back to the story of Michelle Field, who got herself her 15 minutes of fame by screaming that Donald Trump's campaign manager had thrown her almost to the ground and bruised her and assaulted her. I'm a victim, feel sorry for me. And the Florida was looking at pressing charges against Donald Trump's campaign manager when videos of the incident from other angles surfaced and showed that Donald Trump's campaign manager had just taken her by the upper arm and moved her away from Donald Trump. The interviews were over. The reporters are supposed to back off. Now, as you know, yesterday, the district attorney dropped the case against Donald Trump's campaign manager, primarily because that when the Secret Service establishes what they call a protective bubble around a candidate, the candidate's staffers inside the bubble are basically assumed to be part of the security. And they are basically tasked with keeping people outside that bubble, with, along with the Secret Service itself. And that's why the DA dropped the charges. And here's where it gets more interesting. Michelle Fields has now been fired from Fox News, according to ex-Republic TV and a couple of others, because this whole situation of accusing Corey Lewandowski of assaulting her has backflashed. It is brought to the surface all of the times Michelle Fields has cried wolf, claiming she was assaulted, claiming she's the victim. She doesn't want to report the news. She wants to be the news. And the final insult was that video interview of Michelle Fields in which she said that she doesn't have a problem with biased reporting, which is called propaganda. Or, to be less generous, lying. And so she's gone from icon to internet joke. She's fried her own credibility, and Fox News, which is trying to desperately cling to what remains of their credibility, has let her go. And I'm sure Michelle's already out there saying, it's the evil male patriarchy. They can't stand successful women. Oh, woe is me, woe is me. Do you know one of the biggest failings of 1990s militant feminism? They were out there trying to teach women how to succeed. That's a good thing. Okay? But they didn't teach women how to deal with failure. Now, the feminists were always looking at men in high positions, and they'd say, oh, look, you can be that, you can be that. And they wouldn't look at all the other men in lower, middle, subordinate, factory floor positions who had failed. Now, growing up, guys get thrown into team sports. We get to practice failing in full view of our friends and neighbors and family, and we get used to dealing with it graciously. But the 1990s militant feminism didn't teach women how to emotionally deal with failure. Instead, it was always, oh, it's the patriarchy. It's a plot. It's the right-wing conspiracy. And it's okay if you want somebody to be ambitious and strive for great achievement, and you want to teach them how to succeed, that's a good thing. But you need to teach them how to be prepared if they don't succeed. Because a lot of women failed for the same reason a lot of men fail. Their talents and skills don't match that particular situation. And Michelle was showing that. I mean, with her long history of being assaulted, she's not getting what she wants. She wants to be on the air, and she's been fired. Now, getting on to this whole vote fraud issue. The Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders are all going to sue Arizona over the voting problems in the March primaries. Talking about all of that stuff that was going on over there. Now, apparently in that debate that they had, Hillary claimed that AR-15s are combat weapons that are advertised to children. That's complete and utter nonsense. First of all, the AR-15 is the non-combat version of the M16. The M16 is a combat weapon. It'll fire full auto or in 3-round bursts. The AR-15 won't do that. And nobody advertises guns to children. It's just more of her hysterical gun hatred coming on out. Now, there's a story that you all need to pay attention to, because earlier today, Judicial Watch obtained new documents from the Department of State, including telephone transcripts from the evening of September 11th, 2012. That's when the attack on the Benghazi consulate took place. And Hillary Clinton informs then Egyptian Prime Minister Hisham Kandil that the attack on the consulate in Benghazi had nothing to do with any video. It was a deliberate, planned attack by an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. Okay, that's from the State Department itself. This is the reason why this is going to be a major blow to Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were telling all of us that that attack at Benghazi was a protest over this non-existent movie called Innocence of Muslims. And the actual movie never existed. They took a very badly made movie with Arabs and Muslims in it. They edited a trailer out of it real quickly, overdubbed it. Some of the actors in the original movie said, yeah, that's my face, but that's not my voice, and that's not the words I was saying. They threw this together, put it out on the net, and said, oh, this was the cause of the attack. Now, Hillary Clinton told Patricia Smith that the attack was a deliberate attack. Now, Patricia Smith was the mother of one of the victims. And that was at the same time they were telling us it was a video. Hillary Clinton called Patricia Smith, mother of one of the victims, on September 12th, one day after the conversation with Egypt's prime minister, saying it was a planned attack, not a protest, had nothing to do with the film. Then 2 days later, Hillary on national TV blamed the attack on that awful internet video. Clearly she was lying and adding insult to injury. Earlier this year, Patricia Smith came out and called Hillary on the lie, saying that Hillary may have been saying video, but on the 12th of September 2012, she told me it was a deliberate attack. And Hillary Clinton called Patricia Smith a liar on national TV. And now we've got Hillary on this issue dead to rights. She was telling people, including the Egyptian Prime Minister and Patricia Smith, that it was a planned attack by Al-Qaeda. She was lying all over the place. We're going to pound on this one really hard from now through November, because it's another example of how Hillary talks about being a champion for women until the women annoy her, and then she'll come on and demonize them. I mean, Patricia Smith has already lost a family member. She's traumatized. She's gone through this horrible tragedy. And to have a national figure like Hillary Clinton come on out and denounce her as a liar and an attention getter on national TV. So everybody is wondering why, when our government loves a good terror attack to launch a war, did they claim that the Benghazi consulate attack was about this video? Because Benghazi was the hub for the smuggling of weapons from Libya to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, and they needed to cover up that supply chain. Because supplying ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria is technically treason, giving aid and comfort to enemies in time of war. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And there's an interesting article over in the Electronic Intifada. Is Hillary Clinton more dangerous than Donald Trump? And they're talking about the uproar Susan Sarandon caused, saying that if the November race came down to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, that she was going to go with Trump. That she absolutely does not want to support Hillary Clinton. She had this wonderful quote: "A vote for Hillary Clinton is a vote for the status quo. The status quo isn't working." And, of course, the establishment's gone ballistic. Now, the instant I heard that question, is Hillary Clinton more dangerous than Donald Trump, my first thought is, why didn't you ask all those people on the Clinton dead bodies list? As long as Hillary's out there at the debate saying, my husband and I, I worked with my husband on this, well, then, obviously, part of that body count belongs to her as well. Okay, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. Mandy in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just had some comments I wanted to make regarding Israel and get your thoughts on them. I think one of the biggest reasons that our politicians and these governments, particularly like in the UK and the US here, are so adamant about protecting Israel in terms of the BDS movement and uprisings against its treatment of the Palestinians and the humanitarian issues. I think their biggest fear is that that's going to cause a domino effect. Because Israel is such a sacrosanct, it's the most sacrosanct entity, right, as far as like a state. If we knock that one down and demand that they're held accountable, I think they're scared that we're going to want the same from them. And we're going to, what if other countries start boycotting us? Or boycotting the UK. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Well,
that could certainly start to happen. They could boycott the United States. They're already boycotting us on our GMO agriculture, although they don't call that. They call it health and safety. No, what it really comes down to is the government of Israel are absolute masters at subverting other governments. Either they appeal to the common ethnic heritage of Jewish politicians in these other countries, or they spy on and find material to blackmail the politicians, or they just outright bribe them. I mean, this whole AIPAC situation is just a giant kickback scheme. Congress votes to send billions of your dollars to Israel, and Israel sends some of that money back to AIPAC, who hands it to Congress to keep them voting the same way. It's a kickback scheme. And by the way,
right.
Did you notice how arrogant Israel became right after 9/11. Up until 9/11, there was still a semblance of the U.S. kind of being an arbitrary, rather an objective arbiter of Israel and Palestine. And then 9/11 happened, and right after that, Israel just started demanding, you will do this, and you will do that, and you will do that, which is why I think Israel's actually blackmailing the U.S. government with 9/11. Anytime the U.S. government won't do what Israel wants, Israel just calls up and says, look, we'll just tell the truth about what happened on 9/11. It'll be a lot worse for you than it is for us because everybody expects Israel to do this kind of stuff. And Israel's actually right on that. And I think probably the biggest foreign policy mistake in American history is whoever got it into their heads that it was a good idea to partner with Israel to pull off the 9/11 false flag.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think they're blackmailing the United States. But also, I wanted to ask you, have you ever seen a documentary called Defamation by an Israeli filmmaker? It talks about anti-Semitism and so-called new anti-Semitism, which is any criticism of Israel.
Yes.
It's really eye-opening. It shows, have you seen it, Mike?
No, but I'm going to hunt it down.
Oh, it's so great. This Israeli filmmaker comes to the United States. He gets inside the ADL. There's eye-opening interviews with Abe Bachman, with some other Jewish organization where you'll see how they're more loyal to Israel than they are to the United States. He takes a trip with a group of Israeli kids going to a concentration camp in Poland, and you really get deep insight into the brainwashing that they undergo as far as being taught that everybody hates them, being taught to be really ardent Zionists because everybody hates them. I highly recommend it. It's called Defamation again, and you can find it on YouTube. I'm
looking at it right now. I'm going to go ahead and post it. It's about an hour and a half long. But definitely, because, Israel, anytime you criticize the actions of Israel's government, what's the first thing they say? Oh, you're an anti-Semite. You're a Jew hater. You want Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the ovens. And it's a ridiculous way of handling it. It's not even really a debate. It's a way of avoiding the debate. And it's as silly as, trying to say that you're not allowed to criticize the actions of the Nazis because you're just being German haters.
Right. And I was just really quickly, one more thing regarding Israel. I think people should really start asking themselves or thinking how absurd it is that Israel, of all countries, has the nerve to want to control and demand who our presidents are. Do you see the Iraqis doing that, or the Yemenis, or any country that we've bombed to smithereens, who have more at stake with who our president is, demanding who becomes our president?
Well, as an American, it is angering and humiliating to see American political candidates troop over to Israel and touch the remains of that old Roman fort and say, oh, good, can I be an elected official in the United States? And they're just making it obvious that Washington, D.C. is a Vichy government for an occupying power called Israel. And I wish Americans would get a little more angry about that. And as this whole anti-Semite Jew hate thing burns out, they're going to. Because, you can't go on saying it's okay for us to subvert your government to our purposes and you're not allowed to complain about it because you're just being a Jew hater. That's not going to get a lot of traction for much longer.
Right. Well, that was all I had today, Mike. Thanks for taking my call.
All right. Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I just want to touch on this, the Donald Lane duck being overflown in the Baltic Sea.
Yes.
Well, I heard a Politico, and I can't remember who it was, saying that Germany should really take more of this strain. Well, I want to point out to the American audience that actually Germany is not a free country.
Not anymore.
It still operates under the four-power agreement. It doesn't matter. Even the releaser of the Panama Papers only operates with the permission of the U.S. And the judges only get that position with the permission of the U.S. The politicians the same. The radio stations, the TV stations, they all operate in Germany with the permission of the U.S. until 2099. They are not a free state. They are an occupied by America state. And we know...
Well, okay, here's a question I have for you. Okay, I have a question because we're almost out of time here. Okay, Germany lost the war. And, the victors get to make the rules. When did we lose a war with Israel that our government is only allowed to operate with Israel's blessing and permission? When did that happen? I must have been asleep during that day in history class.
Well, I mean, the German military is limited because of the American rules. Well, the full power.
So is Japan, but actually Japan's legislative body has just broken free, and they're now rebuilding their military. It's absolutely absurd, and these lines and layers of control, it's all getting ready to snap. And this is, by the way, this is the reason George Washington, in his farewell address, said, "Beware of foreign entanglements."
Yep. And we're looking at the military is spread right, the U.S. military is spread right around the world, and in no place can I think of that they're actually wanted or needed.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Okay.
I mean, it's becoming a sore point with lots of people in Europe now that with this nonsense with Putin, who we have great respect for, more than we do from your president, I can tell you, we're being forced down this road, blackmailed by America.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to have to let you go because we're at the top of the hour and we got to take a break for commercials and news. So thank you very much for the phone call. When we come on back, new developments in the Michelle Fields situation, developments in the military. What John said about our military being overstretched, we've got an important story about that as well. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And quick reminder, the lovely Lady Claire will be our co-host in hour number 3, an hour from now, with her unique perspective on the world. Well, Michelle Fields isn't giving up on this because there's a YouTube video. We just put it up on WhatReallyHappened.com. Michelle Fields is apparently right after she was told that charges were being dropped against Lewandowski, she filed her own civil case against Donald Trump and Lewandowski for defamation. Oh, they've defamed me. They've defamed me. Michelle, who was it who made this into a big public relations nightmare? It's not like Trump and Lewandowski were standing there and said, oh, look at Michelle Fields. She's a nut job. And by the way, back in 2015, Michelle Fields herself was sued for defamation. I guess that biased reporting thing isn't working out quite as smoothly as she thought. Now, getting on back to election fraud, volunteers at the Colorado caucus are admitting that the errors, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, on the delegate ballots hurt Trump's delegate candidates and probably violated state rules. This election is so crooked they're having to screw those ballots into the ballot boxes. And apparently, according to a report over at the Washington Post, the GOP is planning to use party rules to strip Donald Trump of delegates in Indiana and Wyoming as well. They're going to do it again. We don't need no caucus. We don't need no primary. We know what's best. Ted Cruz gets all of our delegates. Which is kind of odd, because over at the Political Insider, the GOP leadership is making an announcement that they're not going to change the rules anymore. They've learned their lesson. They're ready to accept Donald Trump as the nominee, because any more of these changes and shenanigans, it's just going to make it look like the GOP is trying to rig the process. I'm sorry, GOP, it's a little late for that. We know you're rigging the process. And if anybody in the GOP, and I say this as somebody who spent most of his life as a Republican, paleoconservative. These days I'm an anarchist. If any GOP official told me it was a sunny day, I would take an umbrella with me. We're at that degree of distrust here. Now, they're expecting altercations in Cleveland. The city of Cleveland is spending $20 million on riot gear, specifically to prepare for the Republican convention. If the GOP is ready to accept Donald Trump as the nominee, it's wasted money. It's going to go smoothly. Very clearly, the GOP leadership is saying one thing and doing something else, but then, what politician doesn't do that? Apparently, according to a story in NortheastTexas.com, the validity and integrity of the Texas elections is being compromised. And they're simply saying that Texas election laws, they're just not being followed. You know, the attitude is, this is the way we've always done it, we're going to do it this way. Our election system is a complete, absolute joke. And in the blueprint for the New America, it says we have to have a national standard that everybody follows, and only citizens are allowed to vote, and any candidate whose campaign is caught in any kind of fraud is immediately thrown out of the race and banned from public office for life. Because if you cannot keep your own campaign people in compliance with the law, then by definition you are unsuited for elected office. That's it. Now let's talk about that incident with the Donald Cook that happened. And the U.S. is still out there saying, the Russians were provoking us. They overflew us 40 times. John Kerry's out there saying shooting down the Russian jets would have been justified. Well, there's two problems with that. First of all, it appears the Donald Cook was once again completely paralyzed by Russia's electronic warfare equipment. That's why the plane flew past them 20 times. It knew nothing was going to happen. Second, as it now transpires, the Donald Cook, and they like to put it this way, strayed into Russian territorial waters in the Baltic Sea. They were over there by the coast and just maneuvering around, and golly gee whiz, we went over the line, and that's when Russia came on out to see what the heck they were up to. Which, given the belligerence of the U.S., that's a wise and prudent thing for them to do. Or maybe the Donald Cook strayed into Russia's waters, hoping to trigger some kind of a confrontation. And the Russians came on out, shut down the electronic warfare systems on the Donald Cook, thumbed their noses, and flew back home. Putin's a chess player. There is no way John Kerry and Barack Obama are going to be able to outthink him. We are hearing once again down in Syria from the volunteer forces, the United States is helping ISIS to survive in Iraq. They're claiming that they have got video of U.S. aircraft dropping military supplies for ISIS. Another report, this one's out of FARS News. U.S. military advisors secretly meeting ISIS leaders. And when we put this story up on the webpage, we paired it up with those photos of U.S. Senator John McCain, all buddy-buddy, with the leaders of ISIS. See, that's what's going on. That's why they wanted the consulate in Benghazi destroyed. They wanted to destroy the paper record of this amazing deception, where at the same time the U.S. government was telling you that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are these evil terrorists you must be afraid of. The U.S. government was spending your tax money to give these terrorists weapons of war. Coincidentally enough, the very same kind of weapons Hillary Clinton doesn't think you should be allowed to own. Ash Carter is going to board an aircraft carrier in the South China Sea and then sail through the disputed waters. They're going to go across the line here. I dare you to do something about it, China. I dare you to do something about it. They're up against a rather important deadline, April 19th. We're going to get into that in just a minute here. Now, Fox News was reporting budget cuts leaving Marine Corps aircraft grounded. And they're talking about how large numbers of Marine Corps aircraft can't fly. They can't find spare parts. They don't have the money to buy spare parts. Remember we were saying about special forces are running out of guns. They're running out of equipment. The stockpiles have been drawn down. The warehouse is empty. Fox News on the TV report was talking about how the Marine Corps are having to cannibalize aircraft to keep the rest flying. They go on out and they say, that one's in the worst condition, that's now grounded, take your parts off of that to keep the rest going. When an army reaches that stage where they're having to cannibalize some of their equipment to keep the rest of the equipment running, that is a sign of imminent defeat. It's out there. Alrighty, let's see. Over in Israel, Netanyahu authorized some new construction, saying it was just it was an upgrade, a refurbishment. We're not building any new settlements or expansions or anything. Haaretz, to their credit, went on out, looked at the actual plans, looked at satellite photos and said, oh no, Netanyahu's fibbing one more time. They're building more and more of these illegal units on Palestinian land. Now, Doug Casey over at theinternationalman.com has a wonderful article where he says the real problem is government. And he says, when you come right on down to it, you need to ask yourself, what useful purpose does the U.S. government serve? And he says he asks that of people, and he'll get a nervous chuckle, and then people will start thinking, yeah, what benefit are you personally getting for all that money that you're being told you have to send in? What benefit? Are they keeping the roads in good repair? No. The rails? No. Is your drinking water safe and clean and healthy to drink? No. Is your food safe to eat? No. I mean, I was thinking about that question a lot, and I can't come up with an answer. The U.S. government doesn't serve any useful purpose to me that I can think of. They're spying on me. They're starting wars in my name. They're committing war crimes, torture, drone strikes. That's not useful to me. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And earlier I was mentioning about how the Donald Cook may have been trying to provoke some kind of a conflict going on. They really need that war. And I mentioned the date of April 19th. And the reason I mention that is because April 19th, next Tuesday, is when China debuts its new gold-backed yuan international trading currency. And when you're looking at a trading currency that is backed by gold versus the U.S. paper dollar, which is backed by good intentions, if you believe the government, guess which way people are going to go. Now, according to Superstation 95 in New York, China has issued a statement that at least within China, their gold-backed yuan will not be convertible either to or from the U.S. dollar. It's kind of a little salt in the wound kind of a situation. But that's going to cause some turmoil on the markets. And by the way, did you notice on a Friday, they didn't get their traditional Friday happy ending on the stock market? Wow. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a quick phone call here. Mo in Florida. Aloha, what's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Aloha. Thank you for taking my call. I just, this douchebag bank and this whole blow up with the price fixing of not only gold but silver. And I got two questions, and I want your opinion. Number one, I think that anybody that's invested in gold, and who knows how far this goes back, and has a lawsuit against these banks. And it's not only douchebag, but it's also HSBC and I think Scotia Makata.
Part of Deutsche's settlement is that they're going to name all the other players in this. Now, since this Deutsche story broke, silver's taken a big leap up. Gold is still going down, so somebody is still out there playing these games. Now, I mentioned yesterday that once Deutsche Bank has reached a settlement with the U.S. government, as far as I know, they're indemnified from any further criminal action. But civil suits, yeah. There could be a class action lawsuit from anybody who's invested in silver and gold going back for as long as this rigging was going, to say, hey, you cost me these profits. If it hadn't been for the rigging, I would be worth a whole huge amount of money. And yes, all along I've been saying, invest in gold, invest in gold, invest in gold. Don't make the mistake I made, though. I made a huge mistake. I invested in gold coins, and I discovered they really lose their resale value if you eat the chocolate bit out of the middle. So don't do that. They just put them away.
Hey, question number two. Question number two, Michael. What I don't understand, I totally get that, but not the chocolate part in the middle. the fact that this thing's been rigged. They've admitted it. But what I don't get, what confuses me is, I know they're all part of the same game. Why is the SEC doing this? Why did they step up? What is some kind of a sham thing?
I think they needed to sort of take the lead on this because other countries were getting ready to move in and prosecute these banks. And the concern was that, here in the U.S., the SEC will give them a relative wrist slap, which they did, as opposed to other countries like Iceland who throw these kind of people in jail. Unfortunately, the current government in Iceland has changed the laws to let the bankers out again. And it does prove the money junkies are calling the shots because the money junkies have enough of our money to buy our politicians out from under us.
I think that's probably as good an answer as any. I think that I think that the gold should have shot up $100 an ounce today at least. But like you said, there's somebody else controlling it. But appreciate your response. Thank you, and I'll let somebody else ask a question. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you very much here. And basically what's going on with the gold, the way they keep those prices down, the London gold fix, and I emphasize the word fix, takes the price of paper gold contracts, the commodity contracts, and blends them with the price of physical delivered metal. And all they have to do is keep on printing more of those contracts to exceed demand, and the price goes down. So that the Federal Reserve, J.P. Morgan, and all these other bullion centers that were playing games with other people's gold can try and buy as much gold to replace what they lost at the lowest possible price. It's all about saving them money. But right now, the paper contracts are leveraged an insane degree, something like 500 to 1. That means for every 1 ounce of real deliverable physical gold, there are contracts promising the delivery of some 500 ounces floating around there somewhere. Now, so far, the issuers of these contracts have evaded the consequences of what they're doing by convincing their investors to roll those contracts over for another period, or if the contracts are going to be delivered, they'll say, we'll settle for the cash value equivalent of the gold plus a big premium, more money than you would make by taking the actual gold and selling it on the market today. And apparently a lot of investors are willing to go for it because, you know, if they can't get the gold, they'll take the ink and paper. But a lot of people are trying to hold on to gold for the long term. But there's going to be a gold run at some point. And again, we talked about all of this on America's Book of Secrets, The Gold Conspiracy, which I guess the Deutsche Bank admission of guilt. A lot of people are hunting that episode down and looking at it because I actually got an email saying, oh my goodness, we see you actually wearing a necktie, which... So people are looking at that. All right, real quick, we're going to talk to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Mike, I saw a little part of the debate yesterday. As much as I could stomach watching her, you know, between Bernie and Mr. Willie. And Bernie's making mistakes on there. For one thing, when they were arguing about, I don't know if you saw any of it, about Libya and about Syria, Bernie gives her half a loaf. He says, yeah, well, they're bad guys, Gaddafi's bad, but we still have no business interfering. Don't give her anything. First of all, Assad...
No, actually, that was a very smart answer for Bernie to do. He does not want to get into a debate with Hillary about whether or not these are good or bad people over there because Hillary will she'll grandstand. She'll have the center spotlight about why Assad is bad, why Putin is bad, why Gaddafi was bad, why Saddam was bad. Bernie actually played it right. Okay, I will stipulate they're bad people. That still doesn't mean we have a right to be there. And his point is we're not the world's policemen, and we shouldn't be. We don't have the military might to do it. We've got so many problems here at home. You know, we don't have any business going on out and trying to save the world. Somebody sent me a cartoon a little while ago, which I'm going to find a place to use, and it says, as long as there is one homeless child in America, we don't have room for illegal immigrants and Muslim refugees. And that's an absolutely on point, concept.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
Real quick.
If it came down to, if Bernie does get the nomination, and let's say if anybody else but Trump, do you think you could force Bernie for president?
Yeah, my attitude is anybody but Hillary at this point.
Yeah, but what about between, like, say, Cruz?
We got to take a break here. I'm not going to vote for Cruz. He's not eligible. Period. End of discussion. And I don't care what some judge says. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're talking about the economy, and when you brush aside the hysterical proclamations of the corporate media, talking heads, and politicians, you will see a lot of indicators that things are not doing well at all. And again, as I mentioned, for a Friday not to have their massage for the end of the week happy ending, that's kind of an interesting situation going on. Now, earlier in the week, there was a bank stress test, and it didn't go very well. Jamie Dimon over at J.P. Morgan felt obliged to come out and say, well, our liquidity is really great. And then the next day they had to admit that their earnings were actually in decline. So I'm looking at a story, Investment Watch blog. 5 of the 8 largest U.S. banks are on the verge of insolvency and fail to meet the 2008 law on preparations for bankruptcy. What they like to call the living wills. In other words, following the collapse of AIG during the mortgage-backed security fraud, the federal government said, all financial institutions, let's forget about this too-big-to-fail nonsense. You can fail. You can fail so big that no bailout will save you. Have a plan. And apparently, a lot of banks don't. They're just going to hope the good times go on forever, but they're not. Governmentslaves.info, they're starting to have a meltdown in the real estate market down in Miami. Started seeing it in New York, out in California, now in Miami. They've made the same stupid mistake all over again. They're frothing up real estate values and flipping it back and forth. And they made another huge bubble. And you know why they did it all over again? Because nothing bad happened to them when they did it the last time. You got to pay all the losses. That's your place in our society, to cover all the losses so the money junkies can go on out and try again, have another spin at the wheel. Do you realize our entire national economy, Wall Street, is run like a giant open-air gambling casino, but it's not like the casinos in Las Vegas, where you keep what you win, and if you lose, you have to sell your car and leave town on a Greyhound bus. In the Wall Street casino, if you win, you get to keep it all. If you lose, they pass a hat among all the workers, the waitresses, the bartender, the clerk, the front desk, to cover your losses. So you get to go back to that wheel one more time. There's never any gambler's ruin on Wall Street because all the losses are covered by you, the people. That's what a bailout is. Taking money from you and giving it to the bankers so the bankers can loan it back to you. Except the bankers actually just threw most of it in their pocket with huge salaries and huge bonuses. Now, Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, has come on out saying that there have to be major cost cuts going on, the deepest in years. If Goldman Sachs is in trouble, it's time to sit up and take notice. They're dismissing more support staff, and they're tightening the expense accounts, and even that's not going to be enough. All right, let's get on to the Panama Papers. Now remember, this Panama leak barely scratches the surface of this gigantic global tax avoidance system for the rich and powerful. This Panama law firm, Mossack Fonseca, is the 4th largest provider of these services. There are 3 more larger than it is, and 100 more smaller than it is. This is just the very first peek behind the curtain of a system that says you must pay your taxes so the rich don't have to. That's the message going on now. Story coming out of RINF.com. David Cameron's ratings continue to slump, both over his support for remaining in the European Union and his exposures during this whole tax avoidance affair. Now, apparently up in Canada, there's a big stink growing there. Whatever the intention of this Panama Papers leak originally was, we're going to demonize Assad, we're going to demonize Putin, we're going to retroactively justify killing Gaddafi and the rest of it. The splatter is going in all directions, some of them probably not intended, because up in Canada, the Federal Revenue Minister has been called to appear before a parliamentary committee to explain this very strange deal between the Canada Revenue Agency and clients of the financial firm KPMG. And basically, the Canada Revenue Agency offered amnesty to wealthy KPMG clients in what the Canada Revenue Agency admitted was an offshore tax scam. And so now opposition MPs on the committee want to know why the Canada Revenue Agency was offering amnesty to people who participated in an operation the Revenue Agency itself admitted was a tax scam. Oh, they're rich. We can't harm them. We can't punish them. Over in Spain, their acting industry minister has been forced to resign because the Panama Papers tied him to offshore interests in Jersey. And it continues to spread. Apparently, tech giants are major players in these global tax dodging operations. You know how rich these companies are. They got special treatment. They're protected from product liability, which made sense in the early days of the VIC-20 and the IBM PC, but certainly makes no sense at all. And they're naming them. Let's see. Microsoft is in third place, 108 billion. IBM in fifth place, 61 billion. Cisco in eighth place. Google in 10th place. It's large corporations, it's politicians, it's movie stars, it's athletes, it's media corporations. The only one not allowed to play in the tax avoidance system are you, the ordinary taxpayers. You have to pay taxes, so the rich don't have to. That's what it is saying to you. And it's global. It's everywhere. It's everybody. Right now, you're spending more on taxes than on your housing, food, and clothing put together. And as we mentioned in that earlier article, what are you actually getting back for that money? Good roads, good schools, safe drinking water? Are you getting value for money? I think for most people the answer is no. Just like that other question. What is the U.S. government actually doing that benefits you personally? And the answer is nothing. Now, over in Europe, Brussels, the European Union leadership, has ordered Dutch members of parliament not to debate the Dutch referendum result on Ukraine, as it might fuel the push for the Brexit. Because if, in fact, the Dutch government ignores the referendum and approves the Ukraine merger, it reveals that the European Union is, like the United States of America, no longer a democracy. It's a dictatorship with pretensions of democracy. But when it comes right down to it, the leaders are going to do what they want. The Dutch people want to cancel the deal. The politicians say, to heck with you, we're going to go through it. The American people want Donald Trump. The GOP leadership says, no, we're going to give you Cruz. That's dictatorship, when you are that cut out of the process. Meanwhile, over in Germany, they've got a university is starting to put together a program to train teachers for the new mass of refugees. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I'm just putting up a story just now here. Apparently, Bernie Sanders earned less in the entire year of 2014 than Hillary Clinton makes in just one of her speeches that same year. Talk about politics and corruption. Now then, real quick note. Remember that big stink between the FBI and Apple regarding this iPhone from the San Bernardino false flag? And it was basically pushing, we must have a permanent backdoor into the iPhones to stop the terror, and we know there's critical information in the phone, and we have to find it. And it was dubious at best because the actual phone in question did not belong to the named patsies personally. It was a work-issued phone. And the possibility that there was going to be anything substantive on that phone was remote at best. And it got to be a big PR disaster for the FBI. They finally backed down, claimed they got into the phone using a professional hacking services company over in Israel. And then said, oh, it's going to be a while before we know it's on the phone. No, it isn't. There's not that much RAM on the phone. And finally, the FBI has come on out and said, oh, yeah, there really wasn't anything on the phone. Yeah, it's just, there's nothing of real significance on it. Oh, my goodness, it's amazing here. All right, now then, over at the Washington Post, they're cranking up the global warming propaganda again. Research shows yet again there's no scientific debate about climate change. Well, that's ridiculous. Everybody knows the climate's changing. And this story is out there trying to push 97% of scientific experts agree that human-caused climate change is real. The consensus is supported by numerous studies. They're out there trying. The snow is still falling out there in the American West. And they're already out there with this stuff. Now, you should at least wait until spring is really here before you start fertilizing the field with this kind of manure. So here's what's going on. First of all, the research which claimed 97% of consensus was flawed. What they went out is they surveyed papers, and anybody who acknowledged that humans impact the climate was counted as supporting human-caused global warming is changing the world. And that's not. The vast majority of these articles are saying, yeah, humans have an impact on the climate, but it's minuscule compared to the sun and volcanoes and orbital mechanics. This whole thing was rigged from the, top to bottom. But even setting aside that claim of 97% has already been discredited, I would remind the Washington Post that when Galileo was trying to demonstrate that the Earth orbited the Sun, 97% of the scientists of his day were in consensus that he was wrong. And that tells us that consensus doesn't necessarily mean that one is right. Michael Crichton used to say, science is not consensus, and consensus is not science. Now, in Henrik Ibsen's An Enemy of the People, there are several lines there which, if you glue them together, and I'm paraphrasing here admittedly, the majority is not always right. In fact, the majority is usually wrong. Because before the majority can be right, one man must be right. And while he stands alone in the truth, the majority is wrong. See Galileo again. Now, last year, National Geographic ran this article bemoaning that people don't trust science, that they're unwilling to accept as unquestionable truth anything said by a paid lackey in a white laboratory coat, which is the 21st century equivalent of a priest's robes. There are reasons not to simply trust what a scientist claims. Alchemy, phlogiston chemistry for another. Prior to the 14th century, scientists thought the Earth was the center of the universe because that's what the church wanted, and they devoted hundreds of years of scientific research on the theory of epicycles, trying to reconcile the Earth-centered model with the observed motions of the planets. And epicycles hold the record for the longest-running scientific goof in history, and yet the consensus supported it. 17th century doctors thought rubbing chicken dung into your scalp would cure baldness. 18th century geologists thought the Earth was 6,000 years old because, well, that's what the church wanted. Prior to the 1950s, scientists thought proteins carried our heredity. Until the 19th century, doctors thought infection was caused by bad air, from which we get the term malaria. Scientists claimed cigarettes were good for you up until the 1950s. They even had a machine to pump tobacco smoke into your bottom, the origin of the phrase blowing smoke up your... Until 2005, doctors thought ulcers were caused by stress. These were all consensus positions. And National Geographic should not be questioning why people do not trust science after its own 1999 Piltdown chicken embarrassment. Science is not perfect. Science does make mistakes. The beauty of science is supposed to be that they admit it, not use the label of science like a modern religious icon to push agendas onto people. Anybody who says the science is settled about anything at all is not being scientific, they're being propagandistic. Remember back on March 20th, 2000? The UK Independent ran the headline, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. Now, the reality is that climatologists who are not dependent on research grants from the carbon Nazis and Al Gore are saying the dominant control of climate on Earth is the sun, which is entering a period of reduced activity, a repeat of the Maunder Minimum, and bringing with it a repeat of the Little Ice Age that chilled the Earth from 1300 to 1870. And the Washington Post, the same Washington Post that assured you Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, is already out there pushing this Kool-Aid. Michael E. Kraft, professor emeritus at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, is saying the RICO laws ought to be used to punish anybody who doubts human-caused global warming. We have to burn the heretics at the stake. How dare they not believe as they're told? Remember, Bill Nye, the science guy, and I use that label laughably, says global warming deniers have to be jailed. Throw them in prison. They refuse to believe as we tell them to believe. Meanwhile, out here in the real world, forecasters predicting 14 inches in Denver and 4 feet in the Colorado mountains over this weekend. Britain to be hit by snow this weekend as Arctic wind brings minus 10 degrees centigrade big freeze. This is April 15th we're talking about. Global warming was never science, and it was never even about the climate or the environment. It's another scam to trick you out of money and obedience by saying, oh, there's a crisis, the world is warming, and it's all your fault, and you will atone by paying carbon taxes and letting us tell you you must live a reduced primitive lifestyle to save the planet Earth from all of you icky-poo human beings. And when they started this game in the 1990s, the world was getting warmer. And then Mother Nature did an about-face. That's where we got all that hide the decline and rigging of the data in the computer code. Because this wasn't about science. You would, if it had been really about the science and climate and a concern about global warming, the instant the globe stopped warming, they would have said, oh good, the problem's solved. Let's move on to something else. But they didn't. They kept hammering this issue and pushing it. And the Washington Post is continuing that proud tradition of flinging the manure at you, the people, to get you to pay carbon taxes. Because our government is desperately broke. And they didn't get the windfall of tax revenues they were expecting from Obamacare. In fact, the government is now having to prop up these health insurers who were part of this scam. And so, yeah, they're going to hit you with a carbon tax as soon as all the snow is melted and they're convinced that you've forgotten all about this last hard winter and the previous hard winter and the hard winter before that and the hard winter before that. They're going to come out with a bunch of news about, oh my goodness, this temperature measuring station in the middle of an airport with all these jet planes burning kerosene around it is measuring 120 degrees. It's a record. How many times do you have to be lied to until you stand up and confront the fact you live with a government and an establishment media that lies to you about everything? It's how they control you. It's how they take your money. It's how they take the lives of your children. It's how they bleed you dry of your wealth and your labor and abandon you as a used-up, worn husk when you're no more use to them. It's time to stand up and say, you're lying to me, and I don't listen to you anymore. It's time to do that, really. All right, we're just going to come up here on our top of the hour news break and commercials. When we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us with her unique perspective on the world. So stay tuned, and we'll be back after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us on Friday afternoons with her unique perspective on the world. Before I turn the microphone over to you, I have to comment on that last news break and the story about the economic recovery. What recovery? I mean, of course, everything coming out of the government and the establishment media is just absolute fiction, of such a strength that we could fertilize farm fields with it. It's all a lie. They're trying to create this illusion that everything's all hunky-dory so that you will vote the incumbents back into power and you won't want to bring in the outsiders to change it. Oh, we can't allow outsiders. Stick with the status quo. Stick with the establishment. The establishment fall down, go boom.
Yep.
Look at your own finances. Look at your own standard of living. Look at the cracks in the roads. Look at the rust and corrosion. Look at the water pouring out of the taps in Flint and other cities, and tell me that the current government is doing a job that deserves to continue.
Or take a look at how the VA is treating our vets.
Absolutely. There's government-managed health care for you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, what's your first item?
Media silent as U.S. and U.K. train Saudi forces responsible for war crimes in Yemen. Now, this comes to us from anti-media from the U.K. Just over a year ago, since the Saudi-led bombings of Yemen began, an estimated 3,000 civilians have been killed, and 82% of the population needs some form of humanitarian assistance. Water shortages and a fuel blockade, combined with airstrikes and sniper attacks, have transformed the region into a humanitarian crisis. 22 of Yemen's governates teeter on the edge of famine. And since the assault began, 31,000 war wounded have had to be treated by Doctors Without Borders, who claim that ordinary people are bearing the brunt of an increasingly brutal conflict. And there don't seem to be many journalists in sight. And while the Syrian conflict is plastered on the pages of most mainstream news outlets, Yemen has been met with indifference and until recently a virtual media blackout. Writing for Stop the War, Nawal al-Maghafi sums up the reason for the silence. Unlike in Syria and the UK, the UK and the US are the two primary causes of the problem in Yemen. Put simply, a coalition of the wealthiest Arab states have joined forces to bomb and starve one of the poorest, with the assistance of the two richest and most powerful powers in the world. But thanks to some campaign groups and humanitarian agencies, some details are beginning to unfold. Here in the UK, we quickly discovered Britain has licensed £2.8 million worth of arms exported to Saudi Arabia. In addition, and despite years of ministerial denial, a 6-month-long Vice investigation recently uncovered British involvement in the covert U.S. program in Yemen, including secret drone strikes. The destruction of clinics and hospitals and the growing need for medicine, food, and water have sparked international outcry, especially over civilian casualties. Yet further evidence of Britain's collusion with the Saudi killing machine came to light this week. Despite overwhelming evidence, Mike, that Saudi forces have broken international humanitarian law, an Freedom of Information request by the human rights organization Reprieve. And if those listening don't know what this organization does, it is brilliant and fearless in its pursuit of justice. They have uncovered more of Britain's covert role in the conflict. The latest eye-opening discovery of UK complicity and collusion in Yemen has revealed that senior British military officers have been training Saudi forces.
Well, I have a solution here. We just had a judge who said it's okay for the victims of Sandy Hook to sue the providers of the guns used to kill their family members. And this is an idea that Hillary Clinton supports. So I think it's time for the people of Yemen to sue the United States government under that same legal process for supplying the weapons being used to murder their people. I mean, fair is fair is fair. If I were a lawyer, I'd take that case. Yeah. And I don't mean to be glib and trivial, but the reality is this is another display of hypocrisy by the U.S. government.
And hubris.
And hubris and arrogance. We know what the U.S. is doing. The U.S. is trying to conquer the world and bring it all back to the dollar hegemony, bring it all back to the petrodollar, and they're failing. They're failing miserably. This whole agenda is crumbling in front of them. And unfortunately, they're going to keep on going, and they're risking nuclear war along this path. Why? The argument over whose brand of ink and paper the world will use for the next 100 years. That's what these wars are all about.
Absolutely.
And it's nonsense. What a stupid reason, to risk incineration of the surface of the planet Earth because they want this particular piece of pretty printed piece of paper to rule the world. I think George Washington would actually be ashamed to be on that bill right now if he knew what the U.S. government was doing with it.
Absolutely. And the one thing that I remember from last fall, the British government invited the Saudi government to its arms fair, even though various rights and humanitarian organizations begged Cameron and the House of Lords, House of Commons, please don't do this. We know what's going to happen. And what they predicted has happened, exactly as they predicted it. These weapons are killing innocent Yemenite people.
Well, that'll teach those people of Yemen to kick out their U.S. puppet rulers. What's wrong with these conquered provinces? They won't stay conquered.
And I'd like to turn over to another very disturbing development with the UK. We know that Britain's Got Talent. We've occasionally seen the show on YouTube, but apparently Britain also has a secret assassinations program and an extended kill list. And there's been a story that's just emerged from the human rights charity Reprieve, again, who, as they say, help people who suffer extreme human rights abuses at the hands of the world's most powerful governments. Their recently published report, entitled Britain's Kill List, accuses the Conservative government of extreme deception of Parliament and therefore all citizens of Britain and the world more widely. Now, officially, Mike, Britain has never had a so-called kill list, but David Cameron had to admit to a limited extrajudicial assassination program a few months ago, which Reprieve reported. There was very little establishment and media coverage, and even less public response. But no one thought that the program was as extensive and broad as has been unearthed. David Cameron's first speech as Prime Minister, May 11th, 2010, falsely gave Britain's hope that can now only be seen as something like hypocrisy on steroids.
Well, let me step in here because we're almost at the commercial break here.
Yeah.
Now, today, the U.S. admits they carry out these kinds of assassinations.
Yeah.
But they have been doing it for a very long time.
Yeah.
I mean, go back to the war in Vietnam and Operation Phoenix. The U.S. government was assassinating civilians. You weren't supposed to know about it. But that's the difference. The behavior of the governments hasn't changed one tiny bit. The difference is the people of nations understand the true nature of their governments and what they've been doing all along. And pretty much most people don't like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And apparently Reprieve's report makes a stunning link. It confirms that the kill list does exist, but is not now just afforded to terrorists overseas, but combines them with targets, with drug traffickers and others. The kill list is officially known, and I love this euphemism, the Joint Prioritized Effects List, or JPEL. The report asserts that British security services, including UK police, have worked along US military to determine who gets named for state-sponsored, taxpayer-funded assassination programs. Now, this is very depressing from a country that gave the world the Magna Carta.
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Britain's final grudging admission that they've actually been working with the U.S. government. They have their own little kill list, and it's not just terrorists. It's other criminals like the other guy's drug dealers.
Yes.
Remember, Great Britain actually fought a war against China over their right to sell opium to the Chinese people. And we know the CIA was running opium out of Vietnam back to the United States. There was the Iran-Contra scandal, cocaine coming to the United States. And we've got the photos of opium from Afghanistan being guarded and transported by uniformed members of the military, including the American flag patch and all of that. So when they're using these drone strikes to target drug criminals, they're targeting the competition.
Yeah.
And this very loose use of extrajudicial execution, where's it going to stop? Is Bill Nye going to now say that anybody who denies human-caused global warming needs to be drone-struck?
Oh, I would like to go there in a moment.
Oh, okay.
I would like to go there in a moment.
All right, fine.
But the whole concept of due process is deeply woven into both American and British jurisprudence. And Mike, what concerns me is because both the U.S. and the U.K. are using these extrajudicial assassinations so freely and without any sense of restraint, this means to me that both the American and British people have truly lost control of the governments which allegedly used to represent them.
Well, I think that's becoming obvious around the world. We're seeing that up in the Netherlands with the referendum. The Dutch Parliament, the Dutch leadership is already saying we're going to ignore the referendum, which raises a very interesting possibility. When Great Britain has its Brexit vote this summer and the people of Britain vote to leave the European Union, what's going to happen if David Cameron says, well, we're not going to pay attention to that. We're moving in closer with the European Union. The Syrian people just had an election, and the American government is already saying, we don't recognize it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's becoming very, very obvious that democracy is supported by our governments only as long as you're voting the way they want you to. And if you vote some other way, oh, the election's illegal, it's disqualified, it's illegitimate, you will do what we tell you to do.
And I would like to remind our listeners and viewers that any U.S. citizen, if they are defined as a threat by the president, can, because of the way the NDAA is written, be indefinitely imprisoned with absolutely no right to judicial process. And I would like to suggest to our listeners and viewers on the East Coast...
Is that a drone out there? No, it's a mosquito. I'm sorry.
You're so bad today. That collective thunka-thunka you may be hearing on the eastern part of this country is that of the founding fathers and the women who love them turning over in their graves at warp speed on this.
There'd be an alternative form of energy right there. We'll just put a big rubber belt around them and a generator.
And, yes, I was going to talk about Bill Nye.
Yes.
And he has put up a video on YouTube which shows the intent of criminalizing climate deniers. And the name of the committee, it sounds so good. The Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, CPAC, posted a video to YouTube yesterday featuring science popularizer Bill Nye, the science guy, suggesting that climate deniers and energy CEOs should be treated no differently than war criminals. Those were the words that came out of his mouth. And in other words, Mr. Nye, like the rest of the totalitarian left, thinks it is at least worth seriously contemplating the criminal prosecution of anyone who disagrees with the climate change orthodoxy to which he clings. And apparently...
And makes a huge amount of money off of, I might add.
Yeah. And today's anti-scientific process apparently involves not open-minded debate, but the ruthless quashing of dissent.
There's a consensus. There's a consensus. There's a consensus.
And,
how dare you question the consensus?
And how ironic that Mr. Nye, as a public citizen, resents others affecting his quality of life, since it is, quote-unquote, progressives like Nye who are obsessed with controlling the quality of life for everyone else. Mike, how brown shirt is this?
It's very brown shirt.
Ooh, that's scary.
With the jacket and tie, I might add.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's going on. Where as the world becomes more aware to the extent to which they're being lied to, all the tyrants can do is all of a sudden criminalize anybody who's got a different opinion.
Yeah.
The First Amendment is effectively null and void. They're trying to get rid of the Second Amendment.
Yep.
And we're seeing it all over. People who point out the factual inconsistencies in the official history of World War II are thrown in jail.
Yep.
Remember up in Canada when Ernst Zundel was in his trial. And the judge literally said, I understand everything you are saying is absolutely factually true. It's still against the law for you to say it.
Yeah.
That's the attitude that's coming on down. We're hearing, Bill Nye is saying, throw people who question human-caused global warming in jail. That other professor is saying use the RICO lawsuit. That's not open debate. It's not science. It's not democracy. It's not freedom of speech. It is terrorizing the public into going along with these absolute fictions on which they will base all future policy.
And I think Bill understands fully the position of the warmistas is just drenched in fraud, but he knows where his bread is buttered. And Ken Lay of Enron fame, remember, worked very closely with former Vice President Gore to develop this carbon tax scheme.
Carbon trading.
Carbon trading.
The carbon
they
trading
wanted
scheme.
to do with carbon what Ken Lay had done with energy in California. Gouge the U.S. taxpayers, once again, based on completely faulty science, so as to fill the coffers of the U.S. government. And please remember about Bill Nye. He flipped last year on GMO products from negative to positive after a trip to Monsanto last year. And as reported in March of 2015, we'll never know exactly what went down during Nye's visit, as Tom Philpott of Mother Jones notes. But we do know that Monsanto has poured millions of dollars into public relation efforts to sell the public on GMOs, because that's what you do when you are a corporation with deep coffers and a product that the public is wisely skeptical of.
It is. And again, that's the new business model. Sell whatever makes money. Even if it's dangerous, just hire somebody like Ann Coulter to say, it's not a problem. Really, you're just being silly. And remember that time they cornered one of Monsanto's representatives on a camera?
To drink.
And they said, okay, if it's so safe, drink a glass of it. And he says, I'm not stupid. And he just walked right out. And that's it. They don't want to spend the money to make safe, effective products. That costs too much money. They just want to sell you junk because it's cheaper to bribe the politicians to make it mandatory, like vaccines, or to block labeling to keep their business going. That's outright economic fascist dictatorship that we are living in right now. All right, we got about 15 seconds left on this break, and then we're going to take another commercial break and come on back with the lovely Lady Claire. So
I'd like to tease what I'd like to talk about next.
Tease real quick.
Red Sea deal. Are Israel and Saudi Arabia forming a joint military?
That'll be interesting to see.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And what is your next story?
Well, as I teased with, the Red Sea deal. Are Israel and Saudi Arabia forming a joint military? And this comes to us from antimedia.com. As more details emerge revealing the brutal nature of the ongoing military campaign carried out by Saudi Arabia in Yemen, Muslim press reports that documents leaked by an unnamed senior military official associated with the Israeli left-wing Liberal Party, Me'erz, show that Israel and Saudi Arabia have cooperated in military efforts. The report also suggests that some of the islands tied to the recent Red Sea deal are also being used by both nations to train their joined military. The 2014 memorandum claims Israel hosted a number of Saudi officials in military training courses carried out at the port of Haifa in Israel. The training allegedly took place in 2015, while a recent Jerusalem Post report confirms the Saudi kingdom and the Jewish state have been close as of late. The outlet also claims details pertaining to the alleged ties between the nations aren't likely to be made public. And that is Israel's involvement in the Red Sea deal, which secured the transfer of islands from Sanafir and Tiran from Egypt to Saudi Arabia.
Which angered the Egyptian people no end, I might add.
They're still very angry.
They're very angry about it. By the way, yes. I have some advice for the Saudis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, have a really big flag on your ships because Israel has a bad habit of shooting up the ships of its allies, like the Liberty.
Yes. And apparently this is just another one of the many covert interactions between the two countries. In the Muslim press report, Israel and Saudi Arabia are implicated in the formation of a joint operation in Tiran Island, one of the islands handed over to Saudi Arabia after Israel's approval of the agreement between the Saudis and Egyptians. Now, while the Jerusalem Post does not mention any military training carried out by either nations in the past couple of years, journalist and security expert Yossi Melman admits Israel's involvement in the deal between the Saudis and Egypt. And it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the secret processes taking place behind the scenes. Though Israel and Saudi Arabia do not have formal ties, the Jerusalem Post reports, the two countries do have third-party economic ties, which see Israeli products, agricultural and technological goods arriving via the Palestinian Authority, Jordan or Cyprus. According to the report, Iran is seen as the number one threat to both Saudis and Israelis. As a result of their common fear, the Saudis have given Jerusalem approval for Air Force jets to pass through their airspace in the past, just in case the Jewish state decides to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. Michael, this is one of the most terrifying developments in the region.
Well, it's a continuation of something we've been seeing all along. Everybody knows that there are way too many world leaders who want war to avoid it. So they're all making whatever preparations they think are going to best serve their interests when the shooting really gets underway. But again, I think future history books are going to say that we were already into World War III by this point in time.
Yes.
All that's lacking is a big spectacular event like the sinking of the Lusitania or Pearl Harbor, where everybody says all these little wars all over the place are actually part of one big global war. And I think it's only a matter of time before we get that big bang.
Yeah. I'd like to move over to Central Asia, Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijani Minister of Defense claims that Armenia violated the ceasefire 120 times in 24 hours. That's intense. The head of Azerbaijan's Foreign Ministry's press service, Kimet Gaziev, said that the Armenian side continues shellings and provocations along the line of contact in they are saying that the Armenian side was the first to launch military operations on the contact line. The Armenian side said that they had concentrated its armed forces on the line of contact until the 2nd of April. And both countries are accusing the other of provoking the hostilities, and apparently there have been just nasty violations, a lot of people killed and wounded. And Mike, I'm hoping that Russia is going to be able to be the adult in the room here and talk the Armenian government out of more provocations, because if this heats up, it could turn the area into just a powder keg and could become a world war.
Well, see, here's the thing. The U.S. ultimately has to go to war against Russia to get rid of the threat of the ruble against the dollar, just like they have to eventually go to war with China to get rid of the threat of the yuan. Mm-hmm. And because of the gold-backed yuan, China may have now moved up a notch on the to-be-attacked list.
Yeah.
What Russia needs to be very careful of is the U.S. attempting to force a provocation to bring about that conflict. And the fact that the Donald Cook actually strayed, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, into Russian territorial waters, triggering that Russian flyby, that may have been deliberate, hoping that Russia would fire on the Donald Cook. Now, Putin's not that stupid to do that. Mm-hmm. But at some point, the U.S. could send a ship into Russian waters and then sink it using a submarine and blame Russia for it.
Yeah.
We know all the frauds the U.S. has used before, such as the Lusitania is a classic example.
Right.
The ship was loaded up with weapons. Everybody knew it. It was sent into an area where they knew the German U-boats were patrolling without any military escorts whatsoever, hoping for it to be sunk. They wanted those people to be killed so they could stand up and say, see, Germany's the enemy, and trick the American people into World War I. Just as the way that Franklin Roosevelt spent the entire year of 1941 goading the Japanese into attacking Pearl Harbor and then pretending it was a big surprise and shock. That's how they get these things going. Mm-hmm. Anybody who wants to start a war, they have to trick their people into it. 9/11, good example, to launch the war on terror, the 100-year war to make the U.S. supreme. All right, we got ourselves a real quick phone call here. Arosh in Toronto. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing good.
It's actually Arash. But I wanted to bring up the point that these certain countries that you talk about, how Saudi Arabia, Israel, U.S., and other certain countries, they work together, right? You absolutely know that, and you mention it all the time. But I want to bring up the fact that it's the governments of these countries that are working together. It's not the population.
Oh no.
Within these countries.
No, that's very valid.
You're right.
You're absolutely right. We're always talking about the actions of these governments. We're talking about very small number of people, really, but they have acquired power and authority. By means both fair and foul, usually foul. And it's the actions of them. And we try and make that distinction when we talk about Israel. We're talking about Israel's government. When we're talking about the United States, we're talking about the United States federal government. When we're talking about Saudi Arabia, we're talking about the ruling family. Ordinary people do not want war. Ordinary people are perfectly capable of getting along peacefully, tolerant with each other.
Yeah.
It is these governments that try and fan up hate and fear to serve their interests of war and conquest.
And that's why we can't fall for it.
Yes, and I feel that differentiation has to be made and emphasized.
Yes.
Every time that point comes up, that has to be differentiated.
We'll try and be a little bit more diligent about that. We do make a point of saying that from time to time, but I'll try and be a little bit more diligent. But what we're talking about here are governments. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, we got to take another break for commercials. Thank you very much, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our Pauhana Friday program, and Claire, take it away.
Something that probably, if you are listening to corporate news on television, they may have missed. Apparently, the Iraqi members of parliament have skipped a cabinet vote and fired their speaker instead. After delaying the vote on a new cabinet from Tuesday to Thursday, Iraq's parliament canceled the vote entirely today, following up a fistfight dominated Wednesday's session and with one in which they fired the Speaker of the Parliament, Salim al-Jabouri. Jabouri's ouster was seen primarily as a move against Prime Minister Haider Abadi, but also riled the nation's Sunni Arab minority, as he was materially the last high-ranking Sunni Arab government figure left. Jabouri and his supporters, however, are complaining that the vote was unconstitutional and that the parliament lacked a quorum. The indications are that it was extremely close to the 170-man quorum count, with the official figure at 173. Secretary of State Kerry, white courtesy telephone, please.
Well, what's going on is Iraq's government is in a state of meltdown.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear Kerry out there saying that whatever's going on in Baghdad is not going to change the U.S. sending troops in to fight ISIS. Of course, they're not fighting ISIS, as we reported earlier in the show. Mm-hmm. The people on the ground have got videotapes of U.S. warplanes dropping supplies, weapons, ammunition, food, to the ISIS terrorists. Mm-hmm. When they've overrun these ISIS bases, they're finding all these Pentagon-stamped MREs. And what the U.S. is really doing is having to go back into Iraq one more time because those gosh darn Iraqi people won't stay conquered. And if the government in Baghdad falls, and it looks like it's about to from its corruption, because any installed puppet junta is going to be corrupt. When you look at the kind of people you have to find who are going to go along with ruling a country for the benefit of a foreign power, you're not getting the high moral or ethical ground on this situation.
And Mike, I wanted to ask you, what happens if the Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr runs for the office of Prime Minister and wins? Has anyone in the U.S. government wondered what Iraq is going to look like under that scenario?
Well, the first thing he's going to do is tell the Americans, get out of our country.
Yeah.
And the U.S. is going to be looking at another situation of having to re-invade Iraq for, what would this be, the 7th, 8th, 9th time?
I've stopped counting.
Yeah, I've lost count on this whole thing a long time ago.
Yeah.
And finding some way to justify to the American people why we have to send our young kids in uniform back into Iraq yet again. And so this, as I mentioned earlier in the show, this plan to conquer or regime change all of the oil-rich countries of the Middle East, it's in serious trouble. It's stumbling badly. Mm-hmm. They're having to garrison Afghanistan permanently to keep the oil and opium flowing. Had to go back into Yemen. Still can't get into Syria, can't get into Iran. Having to go back into Iraq. Having to go back into Libya. This plan's in a total meltdown. But unfortunately, our leadership have gone so far, they can't turn around and say, we were wrong, we want to go back to peace through prosperity, because the U.S. economy would immediately implode.
Yes, and I would like to end with a story back here at home that is just, it's making me so angry that it's very difficult to contain. I read a story today that one-third, 30% of Detroit elementary schools reported unsafe lead and copper levels in the schools. Almost a third of elementary schools in Detroit, Michigan tested positive for unsafe levels of lead or copper or both in their water, prompting the city's health chief to suggest that every child in the district gets screened for exposure. It's too late after the lead poisoning. It is irreversible, Mike.
Well, you can get the lead out through chelation, which is a very complex process, but the damage to the brain is permanent. Remember what we were talking about yesterday, where the Lancet has finally said fluoride that they were putting in the drinking water and dental products is a neurotoxin on the level of arsenic, mercury, and lead. The damage is done. And this should be a horrible scandal. Now, we're almost out of time. I want to make a point here. You can go online, you can find them on eBay, you can get a water testing kit for about $20. It is money well spent. And you will get tests for lead, microbial content. There's about 6 or 8 different things you can test for in your water. And we got one for here in Hawaii. And our water is absolutely great. They stopped fluoridation back in the 1990s. And the only thing that our water is exceptionally hard, which when you realize we're sucking it out from inside an extinct volcano makes a lot of sense. But anybody should be concerned. You know, have your child take a little bottle in their lunch pail, unless you're in one of those schools where you're not allowed to have lunch pails because the dictator's wife tells your kid what to eat for lunch. But get just a little plastic bottle and just say, get some water out of the drinking fountain, put it in here. Bring it home and test it. The government doesn't want to go any further on this. They created the problem, and they don't want to spend the money to solve it because they're in the middle of a war budget.
Yeah.
So if you're going to protect your children from toxic drinking water, you have to take that step for yourself. Test your home water, test your workplace water, test your school water, and find out what's going on. And if you have to go with a bottled water company after testing that, you may have to do that. And, of course, Nestle's whole idea, Nestle, the company that's sucking out all of California's drinking water to bottle and sell back to the Californians, they don't want safe tap water. Their business plan requires the tap water coming into your home to be dangerous to drink so that you will buy their bottled water at $2 for a little bottle like about this.
To be privatized. And, Mike, in my world, all American kids matter. No child should be thrown under the proverbial bus developmentally because no one cares to fix this. But parents and families,
it's the same thing with the autism and the vaccine. It's
yes.
making money now. Who cares what it does to the future generations or the future of our entire nation? Not my problem. I've got my stock portfolio, and I'm just happy as a clam that these things are working for me. And that seems to be the attitude. Got anything else?
Basically, one small article about the millennials.
And then I got one.
Okay, all right. And what's going on with the millennials right now? And the problem is 68.5% of the U.S. GDP is related to personal consumption. And
that was certainly true before 2008. I'd be very surprised that it's that high now.
But the GOP must be pumped up so that even the 35% of Americans who say they do not have enough money to live comfortably are trying to fill in the holes with debt. As a group, they carry 36% higher credit card balances, one of the most expensive forms of debt, than those who say they have enough money to live on comfortably. And apparently the difference is particularly acute among millennials. Thank you.
Millennials. Say that 3 times fast.
Right. Where those who say that they don't have enough money to live comfortably carry 3 times more credit card debt than those who say they have enough money.
See, under our distorted system of economics, a debt is considered an item of value.
It's an asset.
It's an asset that can be bought and sold and traded as long as they don't actually go out and try and collect the debt and find they can't. At that point, it stops being an item of value. And we literally have a system where at some point, people who are owed debts aren't going to try and collect them. Because as long as they don't collect and fail to collect, they can go on pretending this debt is an item of value. And that is a hidden danger for our own economy as a whole. Now, one last story before we leave you for this Kaahumanu Friday. The Missouri House Committee has approved an amendment to the state Constitution that would recognize the unborn as persons. Okay? Take that, Hillary, who thinks that you're not a person until the moment of your birth. So, along with that, I guess what this means under Citizen United is the unborn can now donate unlimited cash to political campaigns here in the United States of America. And yes, I'm making a joke, but good on the House committee for declaring the unborn to be legal persons deserving of protection, because nobody really knows when that embryo or that fetus becomes conscious and sentient. All right, there's the music. Time for Claire and I to get out of here. We'll be back Monday here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, have a good weekend. Share what you know with who you know. Take the articles you're seeing on WhatReallyHappened.com and please repost them far and wide. Get the word out. So we'll talk to you all on Monday. Aloha, America.